Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and we're going to talk about belief. Now, we talked about belief in other ways, belief in the Messiah, belief in suffering, but this is very unique because we're going to talk about belief in the nations of the world, which means the Gentiles, which is very interesting because, again, and this is my theme and I harp on it, but it's a very important theme, is how does Judaism look at non-Jews? So in other religions, we don't have to get into it, that there's a very harsh way of looking at it. If you don't believe with us, goodbye and good luck, and even worse than that. So how does Judaism look at Jewish life, look at other peoples? Now this is, I always say, is the most liberal and humane form of looking at, if we can say outsiders, but really that's not even a good word, because outsiders mean you're outside of something. We're all part of God's creation. So this is very important, and that's why I wanted to tune ourselves into it. Belief, they are human beings, and therefore they're not Jews, so they don't do the 613 commandments. But of course there is a belief in God by the non-Jews, and that's very important for us to know, and if there's non-Jews, that they should know it themselves. So let's get into it, and this is, of course, I always say, excerpts from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, I believe, but these are excerpts about exactly that, faith in the nations of the world. And he has a few quotes right from the prophets in Hebrew. They are called the Noahide Laws, and Yeshayahu, which is Isaiah. My house will be called a house of prayer for all the nations. Very interesting that the house means the Beis HaMikdash, which in English is the temple, which is the Wailing Wall, which is what's left of it in Jerusalem, if you care to visit there, which I do recommend you should. And you should know that the majority of visitors to the Israel are non-Jews. It's very, very interesting. There is something for everybody, and exactly that. It is open for all the nations. And Zephaniah, again, another one of the prophets, then I will change the language of the nations to a pure speech, so that all of them will call in the name of God, and they will serve him in complete unity. So again, just throwing out some quotes, obviously, but very much, again, all nations should have at least a recognition of God. And now Rambam, now codifying it, is very, very important, because the Rambam Maimonides, again, I always kind of kid and say he's not New Age. It was like 800, 900 years ago. So it's very basic Judaism. He's not just corrupting Judaism for today's, because it's in and it's nice and to be economical, but it's not that way. The Rambam in his laws say, and he codifies the law. This is law, not philosophy, because Maimonides did write a book out for philosophy, but this is Jewish law, Halakhah. Moshe Rabbeinu commanded us, as we heard from God, that we should compel all the inhabitants of the world to accept the commandments that pertain to the sons of Noah. Well, your Bible, Noah was the last person living after the flood, and he had 3 sons. Each one had wives, so that's 8 people. But really, even though that we say there was man, Adam was the first human being, and therefore we all come from Adam, which that is true. But then they also say the sons of Noah, because he wasn't the last person, because he had 3 sons, but everybody comes from Noah. This is very important. The Rebbe said on many occasions that Jews should try to bring the nations of the world to fulfill the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah, which, when we just said, sons of Noah means all peoples. These are the laws that God gave for all the inhabitants of the world, and they include the basic rules that are needed, quote, to ensure a social order that is truly humane and to allow every human being to find self-fulfillment. As the Rebbe explained in a letter, the Rambam Maimonides rules that Jews have a Halakhah, meaning Jewish law, obligation to teach the nations of the world to obey these laws. Nevertheless, throughout the long history of the Jewish people in exile, it was generally impossible to fulfill this obligation because of the hostilities of the non-Jewish societies in which they were living. Just putting my own explanations in there. Again, if you were in Poland and if you were a Gentile being quote-unquote proselytized, I don't know if that's the correct word here, but being talked to about from a rabbi, they, at the very least, would not be appreciative of it. So therefore the Jew says, listen, you're going to harm us, you're going to yell at us, let's just be quiet. But we're in America now. In our time, however, and thank God, many non-Jews have shown an interest in learning about these laws, and hence, since the laws of the Torah apply at all times and in all places, the Rebbe has urged us to try to fulfill this obligation. As a step in this direction, the Rebbe suggested that in every school there should be a moment of silence at the beginning of each day when students would be encouraged to think about the Creator of the universe and to connect themselves with Him. The Rebbe not only spoke about this, he sent representatives to Washington, D.C. to press for legislation that would mandate a moment of silence in all public schools. In his advice to individuals, the Rebbe always stressed that a Jew must never be apologetic to non-Jews about his commitment to the Torah and its commandments. When a Jew is doing a mitzvah commandment in the presence of non-Jews, he explained to them clearly and respectfully that he is fulfilling a religious obligation, a commandment from God. As a result of such an attitude, non-Jews will generally respect him more and may even offer their assistance. The Rebbe himself was quick to recognize positive developments in the non-Jewish world and to express his appreciation for them. For example, he often referred to the United States of America as a benevolent government. The Rebbe was well informed about political and economic conditions in the world, and he was interested in helping all human beings, as we see from the following story. This is a very interesting story. In the late 1960s, a black woman named Shirley Chisholm was elected to the House of Representatives from the congressional district that includes Crown Heights. This is where the Lubavitcher Rebbe's headquarters was. When she arrived in Washington, her political enemies were hoping to put a quick end to her career. And so they arranged for her to be assigned to work on the House committee that oversees the American farming industry. This is, again, there's a farming where you don't farm in Brooklyn. So that's what I'm saying. They were putting her in a corner. This was a committee controlled by white male congressmen from states like Iowa and Kansas. And although Mrs. Chisholm was bright and energetic, there was little in her Brooklyn upbringing that prepared her to deal with the economic and political problems of the American farmers. As her enemies had hoped, she felt ineffectual and useless, and after a while she also began to feel depressed. On a visit to her home district, Mrs. Chisholm decided to visit the Rebbe, and when the Rebbe asked her why she seemed depressed, she told him about the problems she had encountered in her career. The Rebbe pointed out to her that there was, at that time, a huge surplus of grain in America, which made it difficult for farmers to receive a fair price for their crops. And in your district, the Rebbe continued, there are many poor people who don't have enough food to eat. Why don't you arrange for the government to buy the surplus grain in order to feed the poor people? When Mrs. Chisholm returned to Washington, she took the Rebbe's advice, and the result was the U.S. Food Stamp Program, a major government program that provided food for millions of people. And for Mrs. Chisholm, it was the beginning of a successful career in Washington. Although the Rebbe was interested in helping all mankind, he never did anything that might compromise his role as a leader of the Jewish people and a spokesman for God in the world. When representing the Torah's views, the Rebbe made it clear that the Torah's commandments are eternal and absolute, and that the final authority in all matters is Halakhah, Jewish law. If a political issue involved a violation of Halakhah or a danger to Jewish lives, There was simply no possibility of compromise for the Rebbe, and he would state his opinion forcefully and repeatedly, even if it was highly unpopular within the nations of the world. One outstanding example is the Rebbe's strong opposition to the peace process in the Middle East, and his efforts to remind the world that Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, was given to the Jewish people by the Creator himself. The Rebbe repeatedly urged the Israeli politician to say this clearly to the world, and he explained why this would be more effective than the arguments that they were using. In other areas, too, the Rebbe always projected the image of a strong and independent spiritual leader, proud of his adherence to the Jewish law and subservient only to God. It is clear that this attitude brought him an even greater respect from non-Jewish leaders. The U.S. House of Representatives and the President of the United States, for example, issued a proclamation designating the Rebbe's birthday, the 11th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, as a day of spiritual accounting for all citizens of the country. It was clear that the Rebbe's regarding the work of teaching the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah as preparation for the ultimate redemption, since at the time of the ultimate redemption all the nations of the world will acknowledge God's kingship. Any step that brings more human beings to a true belief in God is also a step that prepares the world for the Mashiach, the Messiah. So with that note, we're going to read actual letters from the Rebbe. Should a non-Jew want to convert to Judaism? It's a powerful question. I received, again, these are letters from the Rebbe, so the first person is the Rebbe. I received your letter of June 28th, in which you write about your desire to become a Jew through the process of conversion. It has been explained many times that a non-Jew does not have to become a Jew or live according to Jewish law in order to find self-fulfillment. This is because at the time of the revelation on Mount Sinai, when God gave the Torah with its 613 commandments to the Jewish people, he also gave 7 fundamental religious and ethical commandments for all humanity. These laws, together with all their details and ramifications, are known as the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah. And since they were originally given to the sons of Noah, they are intended for the entire human race. The fulfillment of these laws is sufficient to ensure a social order that is truly humane and to allow every human being to find self-fulfillment. Thus, there is no obligation for a non-Jew to take upon himself the responsibility for filling the entire Torah with all of its 613 commandments, except for those special fundamental laws, together with their details and ramifications as mentioned above. This is analogous to the way the different parts of a human body work together. Every limb and organ of the body fulfills a particular function that contributes to the harmonious growth and development of the entire body, and by fulfilling its own particular function, each part of the body has its true self-fulfillment. Hence, it would not make any sense, for example, for a foot to desire to become a hand. Only in extremely unusual cases, there are situations in which certain non-Jews have a special association to conversion, but from the Torah's points of view, such cases are very rare. In addition, you must remember that conversion is an irreversible step. As soon as the process is completed in accordance with the laws that have been established by the Torah, the person becomes a Jew, and there is no way for him to change his mind afterwards. Therefore, a person ought to approach the entire subject in a very, very serious way, and he must be absolutely certain that this is his true desire. However, since no one can be entirely objective about a matter in which he is personally involved, it would be advisable for you to speak at length and in private about this subject with an ordained Orthodox rabbi who can give you a more complete explanation about what such a step would entail. At any rate, since everything is a result of divine providence, and you wrote to me about this matter, it It is my obligation and privilege to direct your attention to the importance of observing the 7 Noahide laws at this stage, and one of those laws is to be kind and generous to other people, not only in material matters but also in spiritual ones. In a practical sense, this means that you should try to encourage more non-Jews to be aware of these 7 basic laws and all their details. You can do this both by teaching people and also by allowing them to see a living example, because we have been promised that words emanating from the heart will eventually have a beneficial effect. And this is especially true when the words are accompanied by a living example. I wish you a success in all of the above. The Rebbe says with blessing, and he signs his name. So that's very interesting, just to review that a Jewish person, a non-Jewish person, does not have to become a Jewish person to be a good person. Actually, I'll give you even more of a quote from Maimonides, that if a non-Jewish person fulfills the 7 commandments of the non-Jew of the Torah, that non-Jews are incumbent upon them, as the Rebbe was saying, they get the olam haba, the world to come. So that's important for everybody to know. One of them is obviously, that's what we're talking about, a belief in God. And this is called different souls have different obligations. In response to your letter that deals with an argument you had regarding the question of whether or not non-Jews have a soul, I cannot understand how there could be any dispute whatsoever about this matter, since there are a variety of sources that clearly show that non-Jews do have a soul. It is also possible to find verses in different parts of Tanakh, which I thought is like really the Old Testament. For example, Yeshayahu, Isaiah 42:5 and 57:16, in this spirit that also non-Jews possess a soul. Thus, it seems to me that perhaps your question was about different levels and qualities of the souls. Now, if this was the point of disagreement, it is indeed true that the soul of a non-Jew and the soul of a Jew are different in their essence, and this is related to one of the most fundamental ideas of the Torah. In fact, that the Jewish people were chosen from among the other nations of the world. This in turn stems from the fact that when God was about to give the Torah on Mount Sinai, he offered it first to all the other nations of the world, but they refused to accept it, and only the Jewish people did accept it. It is unnecessary to add that this does not contradict in any way the teachings of our sages that the righteous Gentiles have a special status, and according to Rambam, who's the Maimonides, they also have a share in the world to come. Judging from your letter, there is certainly no need for me to re-emphasize what I indicated earlier, that our belief that the Jews have been chosen is not a matter of chauvinism or fanaticism. On the contrary, it is linked to a deeply felt recognition that this uniqueness carries with it a wide range of responsibilities and special obligations. Thus, for example, Jews are required to fulfill 613 commandments, while non-Jews are not obligated to observe many of these laws, such as the dietary restrictions and a variety of other prohibitions related to the idea of holiness, for this holiness is one of the distinguishing characteristics of the essence of the Jewish soul. When I write here about the special obligations that are the responsibility of every Jew as a Jew, it is only to emphasize that it is not a matter of meeting minimum standards or even average ones, because in fact the Jew is obligated to reach the maximum. In truth, this should be obvious, for since God gave us the innate ability, and this is part of our being even before we were born, to reach the highest levels of spirituality and holiness, it is only right that we should learn to recognize and appreciate this incomparable divine gift. Indeed, any shortcomings in our efforts to use this gift to the maximum extent indicate a character of disrespect. If in the areas of business and professional life a person always tries to give the best of his abilities, since to do any less is to risk being labeled as a failure, how much more should this be so when we are talking about spiritual abilities that can bring vital benefits? not only to the person himself, but also to those around him and to the whole world. With blessing, again, just to review that, the Rebbe tells us that every person has a responsibility in the world and to use it to the maximum. I think that's an important point. People get to be a little lazy in the world, and you're given a life to use it to the maximum. The true reason why Jews have business dealings with non-Jews. If a Jew finds that he is involved in activities that bring him in contact with non-Jews, commercial dealings, for example, he should definitely try to use his meetings with non-Jews in order to bring them to fulfill the 7 commandments of the sons of Noah. In fact, that is the true reason why the meetings are taking place. On the face of it, such a person could argue that the only reason why he is meeting with a non-Jew is to earn money. True, he knows that God is the source of his income. Nevertheless, it is God's will, he might argue, that a person should provide a natural vessel for the divine blessing. It is written, God will bless you in all that you do. So you have to do something. And that is the reason why he's doing business with the non-Jew and relates to him like any other businessman. How then can anyone say that the true purpose of his meeting with the non-Jew is to influence him to accept the laws that non-Jews were commanded to observe? The answer is very simple. Every Jew believes, and he says after every meal, that God provides food for the entire world in his goodness and in his graciousness, in his kindness and in his mercy. In other words, a person's income comes from God. And since God is able to provide an income for every individual in the world, and there are billions of people, it is obvious that God could also provide him with an income in a different way, a way that wouldn't require any business dealings with non-Jews. And any argument that denies this is not only contrary to our faith, but is totally irrational and the height of foolishness. Hence, it is clear that the true reason for his meeting with the non-Jew is not to earn money, but rather to fulfill his Halakhah. And we said Halakhah means Jewish law obligation, to compel all that happens in the world to accept the commandments that were given to the sons of Noah. And the way to fill this obligation is by speaking about the subject with a non-Jew in a pleasant, friendly manner. Indeed, the entire reason why God arranged the circumstances of his life so that he needs to do business with non-Jews is only so that he will have an opportunity to fulfill this halachic obligation in an easier way, as we now explain. It is well known, and it has been explained in a number of places, that God created the world in such a way that every creature must be both a giver and a receiver. Hence, it is impossible that a particular created being should only be a receiver and not a giver. In the context of our discussion, the Jew's role is to influence the non-Jew to accept the commandments of the sons of Noah, and hence the Jew is the giver and the non-Jew is the receiver. But since it is impossible for any creature to be only a receiver, God also arranged things in a way that the non-Jew can also be a giver. He can help to provide an income for the Jew. And in such a way, there is a better chance that the Jew will succeed in his role of influencing the non-Jew, and his job will be easier. For if the Jew simply turns to the non-Jew and says, I've been sent by God to tell you that you are obligated to fulfill the commandments of the sons of Noah, the non-Jew will respond, who appointed you to such a role? And who are you to tell me how to live? If it is the desire of the Creator and the ruler of the world to give me a specific commandment, he can tell me directly. However, in a situation where the non-Jew already feels that the Jew is receiving something from him financially, it will be much easier for the non-Jew to receive the Jew's advice with respect to fulfilling the commandments that were given to the sons of Noah. To take this explanation a step further, the truth of the matter is that the Jew in this situation is really the giver, and what he is giving to the non-Jew is not only relevant to spiritual matters, but also to material ones. For by helping the non-Jew fulfill the commandments that apply to him, the Jew is providing an influence that touches upon the ultimate purpose and goal for which the non-Jew was created. As a result, this will also have an influence upon the non-Jew's material life, including his sustenance. In addition, it is an influence that will help to maintain a livable world in which human conduct is in accordance with the fundamental principles of justice and honesty. On the other hand, the influence that a Jew receives from the non-Jew is only relevant to his income, and even then it is only a vessel for the blessing that comes from God, since God could have provided an income for the Jew without the involvement of the non-Jew. In this sense, it is very different from the Jew's influence in bringing the non-Jew to fulfill the commandments of the sons of Noah, which must come through the agency of a Jew, since Moshe was commanded by God to compel all the inhabitants of the world to fulfill the commandments that were given to the sons of Noah. In other words, this activity must be done by a Jew, with the emphasis that the non-Jew should accept these commandments and fulfill them, because God commanded them in the Torah and communicated them to us through Moshe Rabbeinu or Moses. Nevertheless, because the non-Jew has a feeling at any rate that the Jew needs him in order to obtain his income, it will be easier to persuade the non-Jew to accept the Jew's advice observing these commandments. To put it very simply, when the business negotiations have been concluded, the Jew should turn to the non-Jew and ask him for a few more minutes of his time for the sake of a very important matter. He should explain that this matter is for the personal good of the non-Jew and relates to his ability to fulfill his purpose and function in the world, which is to fulfill the commandments that were given to the sons of Noah. If you speak to him about this in a pleasant, friendly way, with heartful sincerity, your words will definitely accomplish their purpose. So we have one of these beautiful letters from the Lubavitcher Rebbe telling that non-Jew, again, just to summarize, that the non-Jews have their very much important purpose in the world, not only their belief in God, but to help the Jewish people do their commandments. And in that sense, that the world should be with harmony. And again, it's very important that quote-unquote people do religious things, which of course is very important, relationship with man and God. On the other hand, as the Rebbe did say, and he said it for one line, so that's why I want to re-emphasize the point, is that the idea that there should be kindness to other people and honesty, which maybe saying, well, it's not so religious, it's not like going to a house of prayer, but that's why I want to emphasize that is all part of the religious, if we want. I don't like using the word religious because people think religious is just going to a house of worship, but that's part of the life that we all should deal with, and that is not only to be kind and honest and make peace in the world, but also it goes on the other hand is just trying to influence other people, that even though you're a good person, influence other people to fulfill these mitzvahs. So thank you very much listening to the talks from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about belief, especially to the non-Jews, but the Jewish people interacting with the non-Jews, and have a good day.